Thermarest has always made some of the least comfortable sleeping pads out there for me, so when they announced the NeoLoft sleeping pad, I was skeptical on whether the pad could compete with other comfort-focused pads. But once I got my hands on the NeoLoft, I was surprised by quite a few things and have ended up actually liking the pad quite a bit, but maybe not for the reasons you might think. There are 5 other pieces of gear, so 6 total, that have surprised me this year. Some of it is gear that I never thought I'd try, never thought I'd like, but I finally did. And then other gear is gear that just came out of nowhere onto the scene and has been really interesting. I think you'll be surprised why this gear doesn't suck and why some of it might actually be pretty cool. Starting with the Thermarest NeoLoft, when I first saw pictures of this pad, I thought it looks just like every other Thermarest pad and was gonna be pretty uncomfortable. Thermarest, they've done a great job with warmth and comfort for their pads, but they've always been at the bottom of the rankings for me when it comes to comfort. It also looked like it was gonna be a super heavy, super big, bulky pad, so because of that, I didn't think it was gonna be good for backpacking either. But then once the specs for the pad came out, I was surprised at how compact it is and how lightweight it is. So I figured, you know what, I'll try it out, see how it does on a backpacking trip. Maybe Thermarest did something in order to increase the comfort of their pads, and I was pleasantly surprised once I got it out on a trip. First of all, like I said, it's smaller and lighter than I thought it would be for such a big pad once you have it inflated. That's due to the technologies that Thermarest has patents on, the triangular core matrix and the ThermaCapture technology. Those two allow Thermarest to make really compact, but still warm and effective sleeping pads. But then for comfort, that's where Thermarest did some really interesting things in order to make this pad one of the most comfortable pads that I've ever tested. First of all, the thickness. They made it 4.6 inches thick, which is, I think, the thickest sleeping pad on the market that weighs under 1 kilogram. And then they made the top material stretchy. Those two factors increase comfort in 2 ways. First of all, the thickness allows you to really dial in the pad's softness. So you can deflate the pad a little bit, have a really soft pad, and because of how thick it is, you're not going to be bottoming out and hitting the ground. That second factor, the stretchy top, helps with pressure relief. Thermarest has never had good pressure relief because of the horizontal baffles that they use. I find those horizontal baffles usually lead to my arm kind of going numb and falling asleep. But with the stretchy material of the NeoLoft, it kind of negates the horizontal baffles and you kind of sink into the pad a little bit more, and it really helps with pressure relief. My final verdict is that the NeoLoft is one of the most comfortable pads that I've ever used and one of the top products released in 2024. Next up, we have the Atotech Bear Bag. So this bear bag is IGBC certified for grizzly bears. So it's been tested with grizzly bears that are actually kind of used to trying to get into bags like this. So it's a really good test, and they weren't able to get into the Atotech bag. I first heard about the Atotech when they were doing that grizzly bear testing, and I thought, how can you improve on the Ursack? The Atotech bag's probably either going to be heavier, more expensive, not as capable, and I really thought that it was just going to be a flop. But now that I've got my hands on it, I've been pretty impressed. It is more expensive than an Ursack, but it's quite a bit lighter, a couple ounces lighter. And it has a feature which I think makes it better than the Ursack from a performance perspective, and that's the fact that the material it's made of is waterproof. And that has a couple different benefits. First of all, a waterproof material means that if a bear is chomping on your bag and kind of squishing up any liquidy items inside there, they're not going to leak out of the bag and then provide that bear with a reward. So you're actually benefiting the bear, and it's going to be more effective as a bear bag and deterrent. Second of all, that waterproof material is really nice if you've ever been out in the rain with an Ursack. The Ursack material kind of absorbs water and makes it a little bit heavier, so a waterproof material is going to be nicer in that regard. And there's another feature which I think makes this better than the Ursack, and that's the fact that it's supposed to be critter resistant. I haven't been able to test that out yet, but if this is able to resist squirrels, chipmunks, and porcupines from kind of gnawing on it, which I've had done to my Ursack, then that's a really big benefit of this, and probably right there worth the extra price tag of going with this over the Ursack. My final verdict is that even though the Atotech bag is more expensive than the Ursack, I think it's a better option due to the water resistance and the rodent resistance that you get with it. Next up, we have the Durston X-Dome 1 Plus. This might be surprising to some of you because I've always been a big fan of Durston products, but I've never been a fan of the one-person X mid tents, and with all the rumors and sneak peeks of the X-Dome, I wasn't really impressed with what I was seeing. And then once the tent actually came out, I thought it just looked like another generic one-person tent that you'd get from any of the big brands like MSR or Big Agnes. But then I started digging into the design, the features, and the specs of the X-Dome, and I got a little bit intrigued. So I reached out to Dan and asked if he could send me one, and he did, which allowed me to test it out and kind of see whether I liked it. And I ended up really liking the X-Dome, and it's probably going to be my go-to tent in most scenarios as long as I'm not trying to go super ultralight because of a few different reasons. First of all, it's a freestanding tent, which gives me a little bit more versatility in the kind of conditions I can bring it out in, especially if I'm on like snow, hard ground, rock, that kind of thing. A freestanding tent is just going to be a little bit easier to pitch. Second, it has an all-in-one pitch, which is very rare for a freestanding tent, especially one made by a North American brand, but has a lot of really good benefits. First of all, it's just easier to pitch the tent. It's better in rainy conditions because the inner isn't getting soaked as you pitch the tent. It's also a lot easier to pitch in wind without the tent failing. I've had the X-Dome out in 65km/h winds and it survived those winds no problem. And I think I could push it quite a bit further if I just modified it a little bit. My final verdict is that the X-Dome still needs some tweaks to really make it shine, but at this point, even without those tweaks, I think it's the best one-person freestanding tent on the market. And then we have super ultralight sleeping pad pumps. The first one I saw was the PadPal, and it's 3D printed. And when I first kind of played around with it, I thought, okay, it seems kind of fragile and that it might break a little bit. The Alpenblow's a little bit more durable. I think it's made with a molded plastic, so it doesn't quite seem as fragile. But I've had both these on multiple backpacking trips. I've just kind of thrown them into my ditty bag and just allowed them to kind of get crushed and moved around, and they haven't broken. They haven't even seemed like they might break, so I've been pretty impressed with the durability so far. The other two things I was kind of skeptical about were, first of all, the PSI and how kind of much air they're able to push into a sleeping pad in order to inflate it. I thought that they probably weren't getting up to high PSI, which means you'd have to finish off a sleeping pad with a couple breaths. And then they're also very expensive. For how tiny they are, they're quite expensive, more expensive than some of the larger sleeping pad pumps. But I've ended up falling in love with super ultralight pumps, mostly because of the weight. They weigh under 10 grams and make it kind of a no-brainer to just throw them in your pack, bring them with you when you're going on a backpacking trip, and then easily inflate your sleeping pad. Both of them can either run off a battery bank that you bring with you. You just plug the USB-C cord into the pump and then it goes and inflates your sleeping pad, or they can run off your phone. So if you're going really ultralight and you're not bringing any sort of battery bank, you can still bring one of these pumps and just run it off your phone. My final verdict is that they're probably not going to be for everyone. They still don't hit a high PSI, so you do have to actually put in a couple breaths into the sleeping pad once you use these, unless you like to sleep on a really soft, deflated sleeping pad. And they are quite expensive still, so you are investing a little bit of money into picking up one of these. Between the two, you kind of have a trade-off. The PadPal is going to inflate your pad a lot quicker, but it's quite a bit louder, whereas the Alpenblow is going to inflate a little bit slower, but it's going to be quite a bit quieter. Personally, I go with the PadPal because I'm usually going by myself. There's not many people around, and I just want to inflate my sleeping pad as quickly as possible. Well, I'm talking about surprising gear today. What might not surprise you is the sponsor of today's video, Garage Grown Gear. But let me share with you two reasons why I think Garage Grown Gear is such an important part of the outdoor community. First, they're willing to take a bet on innovative brands coming to market with some pretty cool products. There's no way you'd see a sleeping pad pump that's 3D printed and weighs under 10 grams at a big box store. But Garage Grown Gear values innovation and knows that taking a bet on a product like this is a win for them. It's a win for the brand that makes the product, and then most importantly, it's a win for you guys. Like me, you may have noticed in the last handful of years that there seems to be a lot more new, innovative, creative gear coming to market. And I honestly think a big reason for that is Garage Grown Gear and the opportunities that they're providing for brands. Second, I know that Garage Grown Gear shares my passion for helping people enjoy their time in the outdoors more. I chat with the owner, Lloyd, pretty much on a monthly basis, and a lot of the time we're talking about philosophy and values, and it's the reason that I think Garage Grown Gear is such a good sponsor for this channel and why we've been partnered for years now. Garage Grown Gear didn't influence this list at all, but they do carry a lot of the items that I'm talking about. So go check them out down in the link in the video description and see how they can help you enjoy the outdoors. And then we have mesh base layers. I was kind of skeptical about these because of how much hype they're getting. And I always find that things that get hyped a ton often don't live up to the expectations. They look weird. I had troubles wrapping my head around how they'd be comfortable. And then they're also being advertised as being good in warm weather. And I just couldn't figure out how that would be happening and how that'd be achievable. But I've now had an opportunity to test them out. I tested them for pretty much all of last winter, through this fall, early winter of this year, and they perform really well in cold conditions. The little gaps in the mesh trap warm air and provide really good insulation, but then they also allow you to dump heat really easily by introducing some sort of ventilation, mechanical ventilation, and a little bit of airflow over them. They've also been really comfortable for me. I basically don't notice them at all, and that's after wearing them all day, hiking, skiing, snowshoeing, and then also wearing them at night. When I'm out in winter conditions, I just don't take my base layers off at all, and that hasn't been a problem with the mesh base layers. My final verdict is that mesh base layers are now my go-to for winter cold weather conditions, just based on how effective they are at managing temperature. But their claims of being useful in summer conditions don't really hold up. I've used them in 20 degrees Celsius weather and they're too warm. So use them for winter. They're unparalleled in their performance in winter conditions, but leave them at home in the summertime. Next up, we have the Tarp Tent Arc Dome. I was a little bit skeptical about this tent because I thought it was just Tarp Tent trying to troll Dan Durson. I wasn't sure how much R&D they're actually putting into it, whether it'd perform, or if they're just putting something out just to kind of for a laugh, you know? It's also the largest cross-pole dome tent I've ever seen, so I wasn't sure how capable it was going to be once you got it out into more extreme conditions, which is what this tent is designed for. It is a two-person tent, whereas the X-Dome's a one-person tent. It's also quite a bit heavier, but that leads to better performance in windy conditions. This tent has survived no problem in 73-kilometer-an-hour winds for me. I think it could get up to 100-kilometer-an-hour plus winds and it'd be a-okay. It's a very capable tent and in a different kind of category than the X-Dome. And that's what's been really cool about it for me. I thought that we were gonna have an X-Dome, Arc Dome kind of competition, but really these two tents are different. And the Arc Dome is really geared towards someone who needs a true two-person weather-capable tent. A lot of mountaineering tents and really kind of storm-worthy tents aren't very roomy. You can kind of cram two people into the tents on 20-inch wide sleeping pads. With the Arc Dome, you can fit two 25-inch wide sleeping pads, no problem, and you still have quite a bit of room with two vestibules and pockets and space inside. And with all the roominess and storm-worthiness of this tent, it's still relatively lightweight at 1.7 kilograms. A lot of the time when you're dealing with tents that are this capable and kind of storm-worthy, you're jumping up well over 2 kilograms. My verdict with this tent is that if I'm out in conditions where I need something really storm-worthy and I'm gonna be sharing the tent with somebody, this is probably the tent that I'm gonna go with because it's not gonna feel super cramped and it's still gonna be able to hold up to the conditions. And then we have Ombraz sunglasses. These have been around for a very long time and I've seen various people talk about them, but I always thought that they were super gimmicky, that they'd be annoying to take on and off, and just really not a quality sunglass. I thought they're just like, okay, we're gonna throw this string on a pair of frames and people pay hundreds of dollars for them. But I finally broke down and got a pair, still not thinking that I'd like them. But I've been surprised at how much I've liked them for two main reasons. First of all, using a string that wraps around your head and then tightens in order to keep it on your head is a lot more durable in my experience than sunglass arms. The arms are always the thing that breaks for me, and not having those just removes that point of failure. The second benefit of the Ombraz is that I haven't lost a pair. If you followed my Great Divide Trail through hike, you would have seen me lose multiple pairs of sunglasses. It was kind of laughable at some point, but with the Ombraz, it's not as big of a concern because they're always on my person. If I'm wearing them, they're attached to my head, and if I want to take them off, I don't put them down somewhere. I just loosen the string a little bit and then hang them around my neck. My final verdict is that even though they are still a bit annoying to take on and put off, and they are pretty expensive, I haven't had any issues with these for almost a year now. I haven't broken them, I haven't lost them, and they've been my daily driver for hiking, backpacking, running, driving. I've used them a lot and they're still going strong. If you're curious what I think the overall best gear of 2024 was, go check out this video right up here. It's my backpacking gear awards. And if you want a more ultralight focused gear awards, go check out this video right here.